In Titus 2, older women are commanded to teach what is good so they can help younger women love their husbands and children. On today's show, you'll hear from older women who will share timeless, relevant biblical wisdom and personal, profound life experiences to help answer your questions and teach what God says is good so you can be the wife and mother you were created to be. Welcome to another episode of Older Women Likewise.
Good evening. We're so glad you could join us this evening on Older Women Likewise. We are thrilled to have Teresa Harris with us tonight, who is going to bring a lesson on Haggai. The message of Haggai is for our class this evening. Building the temple of God is so very important, and Teresa is going to talk to us about the book, and then next, in a couple of weeks, we'll do another lesson on application. And so welcome, Teresa. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Cindy, how are things going with you?
Oh, good. I'm here with the grandkids in Pawtucket, Rhode Island tonight. So, yep, things are good. We're just resting here for a couple of weeks before we continue our travels.
Nice. That's wonderful. Well, Teresa, we will turn the program over to you. And I know Cindy's going to be with you as we're doing this program. So,
Right. Thank you. All right. So the book of Haggai, it's just 2 chapters. It's 38 verses. It is a pretty short book, but honestly, there's so much to say. I just don't know if we'll be able to cover it all, but we're going to give it a shot. One of the things that I really love about the book of Haggai is it connects every part of the Bible story together in a lot of ways. It looks backwards. It is absolutely applicable to the time that Haggai wrote it, but it also gives us glimpses into the future. So I think that's really neat, how it's past, present, and future all in one. And again, we really see the message of God a lot. So the timeline of Haggai, like what's happening in the time of Haggai? Well, we see in verse 1, 2nd year of Darius the king, in the 6th month on the 1st day of the month. So this is after the people of God, the Israelites, the people of Judah, have returned from Babylonian captivity. They returned from in captivity in about 536 BC, and they immediately build an altar and start offering sacrifices to God immediately. And then they start the foundation of the temple. Then they hit a couple bumps in the road, and then they stop. And they stop for a period of about 16 years. So God, at this point, in the 2nd year of Darius, the 6th month, the 1st day of the month, says, this is enough. Let's get going again. And so he sends Haggai the prophet to talk to Zerubbabel, who is the governor, and from Joshua, and the high priest, who's the high priest at that time, and to get them motivated to start building the temple again. So I think it's interesting, Cindy, what's like the excuse that people say in verse 2 for not building the temple?
It's just not the right time. Well, we're going to get to it, but we got a lot of projects going. We're just busy. We're busy right now.
Yeah, it's not the right time to build the temple of the Lord. Yet God calls them out in verse 4. And he's like, so you don't have time. It's not good. It's not the good time. It's not the perfect time to build the house for God. But you've built and adorned your houses. I mean, they are adorned with wood paneling all throughout them. I mean, Again, there are very few houses you can find today that are actually adorned with wood paneling, real wood paneling all the way through. We have got plaster and drywall and all of that. They had real wood paneling. So God's really kind of calling them out, that they live in these luxurious dwelling places. But in a sense, God has no home with them. God is uninvited to be there with them. And this is exact opposite of David's attitude. David, who is the man after God's own heart. David's heart pricked him. His conscience pricked him when he said, I dwell in a house made of cedar, but my Lord's ark dwells in a tent. David saw the disparity of that, and he was distressed by that. And that's why he was like, I want to build the temple of the Lord. And so again, the returned remnant of Judah has no motivation to build the temple of the Lord. So God says, consider your ways. And he's been trying to get their attention. Can you see there in verse 6? Cindy, how has he been trying to get their attention about building this temple?
Fill me in while I get my Bible app to work, Teresa.
Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, in verse 6, he's like saying, you've sown a lot of seed, but you haven't had very many harvest at all. You're eating, but you're never satisfied. You're drinking, but you're never full. You have clothes, but you don't stay warm. And you're making money, but it's falling right through your pockets. And so he's like saying, consider your ways. I've been trying to get your notice. I've been trying to get your attention. You're not reaping a large harvest because you're not working for me. So in verse 7, he says, get up and get busy. Verse 8, go up to the hills, get the wood and start to build the house of God. And he makes a really important point that we're really going to hit hard in our second lesson. But he really makes the point here of why they need to build the temple. What's the purpose of the temple? And he says in verse 8, that I may take pleasure in it, and that I may be glorified in it. The building of the temple was all about God. It wasn't about the people of Israel. It wasn't about these Israelites who've returned. It's all about God. We also know from Exodus 25, it would be his dwelling place. That's where God would dwell in the midst of the people, was that first the tabernacle and then Solomon's temple. And so again, having this temple gives God glory, and it represents that he is with his people. And so again, he reminds them again of this situation. You had these high expectations. You looked for a lot, but behold, it came to little. When you brought things home, I just blew it away. Again, in verse 9, because of my house that lies in ruins, while each of you busies yourself with your own house. So again, God says the heavens withheld the dew, the earth withheld its produce. I called for a drought on the hills, on the grain, the new wine, and the oil. The grain, the new wine, and the oil, those are like the big three crops of the promised land, the big three crops of Palestine. And God says they're not bringing it out. You're not getting that. And again, and it's affecting man and beast, and it's affecting all your work. And so what's the response of the people in verses 12 to 15?
12 to 15. All the remnant of the people obeyed the voice of the Lord their God and the words of Haggai the prophet, as the Lord their God had sent him. And the people showed reverence for the Lord.
Indeed. So they get busy. They get busy several times in Haggai. I think it's interesting. He's going to kind of like make a delineation, and he's going to mention Zerubbabel did this, Joshua did this, and the people did this. So Zerubbabel got busy, Joshua got busy, all the people got busy, and they all obeyed the word of the Lord and the words of Haggai. And God continues to encourage them by telling them in verse 13, I'm with you. And he stirs up, again, he makes this delineation. He stirs up the spirit of Zerubbabel, stirs up the spirit of Joshua, stirs up the remnant of the people. And so again, the message was given the first day of the 6th month. 23 days later, on the 24th day of the month, they're getting to work. They're getting to work. They're getting busy on it. And so again, God's message stirred up the people. And again, in our application lesson, we're going to really talk about how God stirs up people and following God's model of stirring up people. So that's kind of the outline of chapter 1, which includes one message from God. Again, consider your ways, get busy building. So we see that in chapter 1. Chapter 2, there's going to be 3 more messages from God. So there's 4 total. And it's really kind of interesting how it is organized. Each one is dated. And the first and the third, so the odd ones, deal with the idea of you've delayed in building the temple, you haven't been busy building the temple, and I've withheld produce. So the first and third deal with that. The second and fourth, again, so the even ones have a future look to them. And both of them use the language of shaking the heavens and earth. And so again, so we've seen the first one. Now we're going to look at 2, 3, and 4. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Cindy, to the message in chapter 1?
Well, the fact that when the people fear the Lord, they begin to do what they're supposed to do. So there's a place for that. And I think sometimes in the religious world, people want to really divorce themselves from that. And it's all love, but it's love. It's both love and dedication for God. But the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And so that can be the thing that turns us around and like, what's not to fear? That was one thing I was impressed with. And also, when God says, I am with you, declares the Lord, to me, that was so reminiscent of, and lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world, as we're building the spiritual temple of the Lord, the church. So those were some observations that I had noticed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, if we understand who God is, absolutely, it is a terrible thing to fall into the hands of a living God. Our God is a consuming fire. He is fearful. God is fearful. But the more we know him and understand him, we build upon that fear and understanding. Yes, he has great and awesome power, or he has great and terrible power in the sense of like what he can do with his power, but yet he desires to use it for our good.
Yes.
He desires to use it to bless us and to have a relationship with. I mean, he's wanting to come dwell with these people. So that's why he's like, get busy on that temple, because he wants to have communion with them. He wants to have fellowship with them. So again, when we start at that fear and understand his power, but then add on to it his mercy and his grace and his love, and it's just like, who wouldn't want to serve such a God as this? Who wouldn't want to be motivated to get busy building the temple of the Lord? And so again, I think that's really what he's going to show us in this next prophecy. His benevolence, his desire to bless, his desire to bestow glory upon his people. And that's absolutely what we see in this next prophecy. So in chapter 2, so the next prophecy is going to be in verses 1 to 9 of chapter 2. And so this is give or take about a month later. So they start building the 6th month, 24th day. This is the 7th month, 21st day. Now, what is interesting about this exact date is this would be the last day of the celebration of the Feast of Booths. So the Feast of Booths is the 7th month, 14th day for 7 days. So it ends on the 21st day. And the Feast of Booths is in the fall. It's going to be here shortly for, the Jews who celebrate in modern times. It's going to be this shortly in this time of the year. So this has been a time of harvest. But remember what God has been saying. You haven't been harvesting much. So they've been celebrating this Feast of Booths when they brought in their harvest, but their harvest hasn't been very good. And then God also calls something to their attention that might be discouraging. He said, speak to Zerubbabel, speak to Joshua, speak to the remnant. Again, he delineates all three. And he says, those of you who were alive when you saw Solomon's temple, and you look at this temple you've been working on now here for a month, how does it compare? And in verse 3, he says, is it as nothing in your eyes? When we read about this in Ezra, when they started building the temple, the new remnant, the ones who had never lived in the land, the ones who were born in captivity and come back to the land, they are rejoicing and they're shouting for joy. They're so excited. The ones, the old guard, are mourning and crying and weeping. And Ezra tells us that you can't distinguish the two, the mourning and the weeping, because they could tell the old guard, the ones who were taken into captivity, who saw Solomon's temple, is like, this isn't going to be anything like Solomon's temple. So God knows they've had a little harvest and they've got a little temple. And so he knows they might be discouraged by that. And again, he delineates them out. Be strong, Zerubbabel. Be strong, Joshua. Be strong, all you people. I am with you. According to the covenant that I made with you when you came out of Egypt, my spirit remains with you. Fear not. So this is a really cool idea to think about. And I think we're seeing like a transition here in the way that God dwells with his people. When the tabernacle was built, so in Exodus 40, when the tabernacle was built, they knew with their eyes that God was dwelling in that temple because his glory in the form of a cloud came and filled that tabernacle. The Hebrew rabbinical word, like it's not, it's just a form of a word we have in the Bible, but the Bible doesn't use this form. It's called the Shekinah glory. And that's a form of the word dwell. And so that is like the word the rabbis would use, the Hebrew word the rabbis would use to give a name to this cloud or this fire that would come down. And so again, the Shekinah glory, they saw it with their eyes filling the tabernacle. When Aaron in Leviticus 9 was ordained as high priest in that, I think it was the 8-day ordination, on the 9th day, I might be getting it backwards, 7-day and 8-day or 8-day and 9th day, regardless, when he took over offering sacrifices at the end of that day, God's glory comes, fills the tabernacle and consumes, the fire comes down and consumes the sacrifice that Aaron offered. Another really interesting time where the Shekinah glory appears is when David purchases the threshing floor of Ornan. He numbered the people, God sent a plague. David prayed for mercy. The plague stopped at Ornan's threshing floor. Like it went this far and no farther. David purchased that threshing floor from Ornan. He built an altar. The Shekinah glory comes down, consumes that offering. And that is the site where Solomon builds his temple. And again, in 1 Kings 8, the Shekinah glory comes and fills the temple. But sad times for Israel in Ezekiel 7 through 10. They despised God. They defiled the temple with idol worship. They did not fear and honor God. And we see in Ezekiel 7 through 10, God's glory departs and his glory leaves the temple. His presence leaves the temple. So again, they're looking at this little harvest, little temple. I'm not seeing the cloud. God is saying, oh, I'm with you. My spirit remains in your midst. Do not fear. In the companion prophet, Zechariah was the companion prophet to Haggai. So Zechariah and Haggai worked together, same time, 520 BC, telling these people, get this temple built. Oh, Zechariah says a wonderful phrase. Because again, they're discouraged, thinking we're not doing anything big here, right? Because we all look for the big things. We all want it to be big events. He says, it's not by might. It's not by power. By my spirit will this temple be built. And so here God is saying, my spirit is with you. And so he says, so yeah, I understand this temple, when you judge it physically, it's not as big as Solomon's temple. It doesn't have as much gold as Solomon's temple. It's not as opulent as Solomon's temple. He says, but in a little while, I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry land. I'm going to shake all the nations. It's like I'm going to sift them and I'm going to get all their treasures. And I'm going to fill the glory. I'm going to fill the temple with these treasures of all the nations so that the glory of this latter temple is going to be greater than the glory of Solomon's temple. So what is that talking about? Because this temple is not going to be, again, if we're going to judge it by treasure, it is absolutely not going to be full of more treasures than Solomon's temple.
Right. The souls of people.
Exactly.
The souls of people are worth more than all the world. And so, yes.
Exactly. Exactly. Absolutely. So again, we talked about that idea. Well, let's talk about this first. Again, we talked about the idea that God's glory, physical manifestation of God's glory, we have no record of it filling this temple. But then he says there's going to be a latter glory that's greater. And again, the idea of God's Spirit dwelling with man. Well, we think about the most glorious demonstration of God dwelling with man doesn't get any more glorious than his Son coming and dwelling in human flesh. So I think in a sense, we can see this as pointing to Jesus coming. And we see the exact representation of God. That's what Hebrews says, right? He's the exact representation of his Father in flesh. It doesn't get any more glorious than that. And we'll talk about Jesus more in the fourth, because again, the second and the fourth are parallel. But again, so we've got this idea of Jesus. But I think, like you're also talking about, Jesus is the head of the church, which is the fullness of him who fills all in all. So while Jesus, during the period of time that Jesus walked the earth, he absolutely was showing God's glory in dwelling with man. But he doesn't live on earth with us today. So how does he show that glory? Through the church who fills the fullness of him who fills all and in all. Again, the church is the dwelling place of God. But again, what is the church made of? The church is made of people. 1 Corinthians 6, we as individuals, do you not know your body is the temple of God? We as individual people are the temple of God, and the Spirit dwells in us. But then when you add us together as a collective, if each individual Christian is a temple of God and you put us together, or even a larger community as a temple of God. So we have that in 1 Corinthians 3. You are the temple of God. We've got that in Ephesians 2, where he talks about bringing Jew and Gentile together. You're being built up into the house of God, the temple of God, the dwelling place of God, the dwelling place of his Spirit. How cool is that? But again, where does this gold and silver fit in? Well, again, that's been prophesied in so many places. Isaiah 54, Isaiah 60. Again, in Zechariah 9, he talks about how he's going to bring his remnant out of all the nations, and they are going to be like jewels in his crown. And then we've got 1 Corinthians 3, right, that we talked about. That's where it's like Paul says, I planted, Apollos watered, God gave the increase. We are working in God's field. We are workers in God's building. And we're hammering in, we're adding in all these materials in the building of God, in the house of God, in the temple of God. And some of them are gold, silver, and precious stones. Some of them are wood, hay, and straw. How do we know the difference? Well, they'll all be tested by fire. Wood, hay, and straw, that gets burned up by fire. What happens to gold, silver, and precious stones? They are refined.
Right. Right.
They're made better. So again, we see that in 1 Peter 1. When your faith, which is tested by fire, is proved to be genuine, is more precious than gold. Again, thinking about the idea of precious stones, 1 Peter 3, what is precious in the sight of the Lord? The meek and quiet spirit of a godly woman is precious to God. So again, the individual Christians coming together to make up the church as the house, the dwelling place of God, they are the gold, the silver, and the precious stones. And again, so the latter glory is greater than the former, because in the former glory, you think about who could come into the temple of God? High priest one time a year.
Well, and the Holy of Holies, the high priest.
Yeah, one time a year.
Yes.
This temple, anybody from any nation, they just have that faith that's tested by fire. That makes it more glorious. Again, we see in verse 9, what makes this more glorious is that it's a place of peace. There was such rivalry. There was such enmity between Jew and Gentile in the whole nation of Israel, right? But in the temple, the latter glory of the temple of God, there is peace. He broke down that middle wall of partition and made peace between the Jew and Gentile. And then we've got the idea of the New Jerusalem in Revelation 21. The New Jerusalem that comes down out of heaven, glorified with all of these precious stones. Again, all of these treasures. It's eternal. Those temples, they lasted some years. God's temple, the church, the souls of those who he has redeemed with his blood, eternal. The latter glory is greater than the former. So again, that encourages them. All right, then. All right. So it looks little in our eyes, but we're going to keep building. We're going to keep building. Again, we will make more applications to that in the next lesson. But do you have any thoughts to add to the second of the 4 prophecies?
Well, I think about how we too, as we build this spiritual temple of God, we are walking by faith and not by sight. So you made that great point about how in the original temple, wow, Shekinah glory. And then less of that was more almost like a transition, this rebuilding, this restoration. And now even more so, we walk by faith and not by sight, and trusting what God says with relation to our having the Spirit and such. I was impressed in the section we were talking about when God says, be strong and work. There were those 2 phrases, be strong. What are you going to do with your strength? You're going to work. I love that we can be what we choose to be. We can be strong. We are not victims of just our own incapacities, that God provides us the strength we need to still do the work in building this spiritual temple. And then I'm just thinking about the book of Hebrews, like if somebody wanted to dig really deep on these parallels of how so much of the Old Testament was predictive of exactly what God had in mind, even before creation, in building this tabernacle not made with hands. So those were some of the random thoughts that came in and out, and I'm really enjoying and learning a lot from what you're saying.
Yes, absolutely. And I think so. And we'll definitely talk about that idea in the application. But a lot of times our discouragement comes from within. We are the source of our own discouragement. Now, when they were building the temple, the first discouraging thing was enemies without. But their own selves, the enemies within, got them from building the temple, their own mindset, their own expectations, their own, again, limiting themselves by their abilities or inabilities. Again, and that's why Zechariah says, not by might, not by power. It is not your ability that builds this temple. It is the Spirit of the Lord. And Zechariah even goes on to say, he says, Zerubbabel laid the foundations, and Zerubbabel will finish it. So it gives them kind of a time marker. It will be finished by Zerubbabel. So again, it will be finished within this lifetime. Again, we live in New York. We've got the state capitol here in New York. I can't remember. I think it's like 40 years or something ridiculous like that. They went through like 8 architects and a couple different governors. I mean, it was a ridiculous amount of years they spent working on this Capitol building. Again, so I'm giving you a timeline. It's going to be during Zerubbabel's lifetime. It will be finished soon. And it will be finished with shouts of grace. Grace. It is built by grace. It is not built by your power. It's not built. And to me, that takes the pressure off me. Okay, so I don't have to have this great power. Wonderful. Because I know I don't. So that really takes the pressure off of us, knowing it's God's power. I'm just the planter. I'm just the water, just like Paul said. But it's God's power who gives the increase. Well, the third prophecy is in verses 10 to 19. And so this is the 24th day of the 9th month. So we're moving ahead about 2 months again. And this parallels with the first one where he talks about the fact you haven't been building, but it also parallels with the idea of how God's been withholding a harvest from them. And so God is wanting to encourage them to continue the work, but also in a way to tell them you've even got more work to do than just building the temple. And so how he makes this message known is he kind of like questions the priest. So he says, okay, priest, so if you've got some holy food, so this holy food would be food that would be part of a sacrifice. The priests were allowed to eat of certain sacrifices, but even the offerer was allowed or even commanded to eat a part of the peace offering. So again, that would be holy food. And there were like rules about how you could eat it and where you could eat it and who could eat it. And so he said, so let's say you've got some of this holy food in the fold of your garment, and that fold of garment brushes up, like let's say against some bread or some stew or something like that. So the fact that the fold in the garment that holds the holy food, if that garment brushes up against food that's not holy, does it make that food holy? And the priest's like, no. That doesn't make the food holy. So he's okay. Well, let me ask you another question. Well, let's say you're defiled, you're unclean because you touched a dead body. That doesn't mean you're sinful. It just means that you can't approach the temple, and you could not eat of the holy food if you were unclean from touching a dead body, and you had to go through the purification process first. So let's say somebody who was unclean by touching the dead body, he touches any of those foods, holy or not, he touches any of those foods. What's true about those foods? And the priest says, oh, those are all unclean now. Nobody can eat them. And so God says, so it is with these people, that everything they are bringing to me, so is with every work of their hands, what they are offering me is unclean. God is saying you still have uncleanness and unholiness in your midst. And you're doing some things right, but it's not enough. You've got more work to do. And again, sometimes, and we'll talk more about this in the idea of the application, that he's telling them being a Jew isn't enough. Being a remnant and coming back from exile, that's not enough. Building the temple, that's not enough. Observing all these festivals I've been giving you in these feasts, doing the rituals, that's not enough. You've got to be holy in your heart and in your mind. You've got to serve me and love me with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. Mm-hmm. And so you don't think that, oh, just because we're building the holy temple, that makes us holy people. And he's like, mm-hmm. It doesn't. And in fact, the opposite is true. Mm-hmm. If you have defilement and unholiness and sin in your life, and you bring an offering to my holy temple, that offering is defiled and it is not accepted. So again, we'll talk more about that in the application. What does it mean for us? But he's telling them, yes, I'm glad you're working, but you got more work to do. But then in a way of encouragement, then he says in 15, consider from this day onward. And he says, remember what it was like when you weren't building and you went to go get grain and you went to go get 20 measures, but all you could find was 10, or you went to go get wine, you went to go get 50, but all you could find was 20. Remember what that was like when you weren't building? Well, consider from this day onward, because you are building. So from this day onward, from the 24th day of the 9th month on, and remember, this is after the harvest. So when the harvest is over, you let the ground settle for a little while, and then what do? You plant again. So he's saying, is the seed yet in the barn? You're fixing to plant again. You're fixing to sow more. He said, from this day on, I will bless you. Mark this day. This is going to start a season of blessing that I am going to pour out, and you are going to have a bounteous harvest. But you need to do the work. You need to keep building on this temple, and you need to get rid of your defilements. You need to be clean. He's saying, and I think this as far as discipleship is concerned, and again, this is true from beginning to end, our purpose is worthy. What a worthy purpose of building the house of the Lord. Our purpose is worthy. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Our purpose is worthy. And the reward is certain. He says, from this day on, I'm going to bless you. So again, the reward is certain. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness.
Yes.
All these things shall be added to you. All those other things you're worried about, I got it. I'll take care of it. I'll give you what you need. The purpose is worthy. So get busy building. The reward is certain. I will bless you. Mark this day. What a beautiful, beautiful prophecy there. Just to encourage them to keep moving on. And so again, the first and the third are all about building and the idea of how they've been missing out in harvest. So do you have anything to add to this third prophecy in Haggai?
Well, yes, just a couple of things. How if we aren't obeying God, then everything we do in the name of God is viewed as an insult in this section. I think we learned that where in order for God to receive our hearts and our acts of service toward him are working on the temple, so to speak, repentance comes first. And so obeying God, I guess I would give a parallel of, are you going to want a dozen roses from a husband who's cheating? Are you kidding me? That's an insult. So that's what we're doing to God. If we are doing our acts of service for him, and we are, in this case, apathy is much of the sin that we're talking about. And so we must, by the strength God supplies, overcome this apathy, and so that he will receive and be with us in this way that he's described, that he will be with us. And is there any other blessing that's better than that? I mean, the presence of God, the blessing of God, and God's promise to be with us. Wow.
Indeed.
That's worth any sacrifice and any change of attitude or apathy, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Amos makes that same idea, where in Amos, God says, I reject your festivals. I do not delight in your solemn assemblies. I will not accept your burnt offerings and grain offerings. I will not even look at your peace offerings. God says, like you said, they are insult to me. I mean, they are just like garbage to me. They're not a sweet smelling aroma. They have a stench to me because they are so polluted.
Teresa, God wants our heart, and we totally get that in our other relationships, don't we?
Sure.
It's not just acts that look like love. God wants our heart, just like we want the heart of our husband. You know, we are his bride. We're the bride of Christ now. So yeah, there's a parallel there.
Yes, absolutely. And here he shows us, again, this idea our purpose is worthy. He is worthy for us to give him our heart. Because what does he want to do? All he wants to do is pour out his blessings. That's all he wants to do. He's got this hugely rich inheritance in heaven. And he's like, I want to give it to you. So please just love me and follow me. And I will just pour buckets upon buckets upon buckets of blessings on you. And so again, absolutely is he worthy. And so our purpose is worthy. And again, it's appreciating that. And again, the fourth prophecy is absolutely going to show us this. The fourth prophecy is absolutely going to show us how glorious, again, the temple of God is. We've got the builder of the temple of God. We've got the idea that the latter glory is greater than the former. And we talked about the idea of Jesus and how we were going to connect that to Jesus. So we're going to see this in this next one in 20 to 23. So absolutely, this is the same day. So the same day he says, the 24th day in the 9th month, this is the same day. It seems this prophecy was to Zerubbabel. In verse 21, speak to Zerubbabel, the governor. Zerubbabel was from the line of David. He was from that kingly descent, and he's the governor. He's ruling the people. But of course, they're under the rule of the Medes and Persians at this time. So God says, speak to Zerubbabel and say this, I'm going to shake the heavens and earth. So the first time he shook the heavens and earth and got all the treasures out. Well, this time he's shaking the heaven and earth to overthrow the throne of kingdoms. He is going to tear down, he is going to destroy the kingdoms of men. He says, I'm going to destroy the strength of kingdoms. I'm going to overthrow their chariots and riders. They're going to go down, and they're going to go down, everyone on the sword of his brother. It's like they're going to be the source of their own destruction. They're going to fight each other and tear each other down. But this is very much reminiscent of Daniel's prophecy from Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel chapter 2, where during the days of Rome, this stone comes down in the mountain and hits the feet of that statue, and this statue just falls and shatters into just dust and is just blown away by the wind. Well, God's going to shake the earth and the heavens. He's going to overthrow the kingdoms of man, and he is going to set up his kingdom. And so again, he's saying, Zerubbabel, you're my servant. You're the son of Shealtiel. I'm going to make you like a signet. So a signet, a lot of times it's a signet ring, but the key is the signet. And so the signet is the seal. So again, if there was like, if Darius, the king, wants to send an official letter to Tatnai, the governor, of this region at this time. He would put wax on it and take his signet and do like that in the wax. And so then, that could only come from Darius, right? So he said, Zerubbabel, you are the signet. I'm going to make you like a signet ring, for I have chosen you. Well, again, I told you that Zechariah and Haggai are companion books. Haggai talks about the ruler from the kingly line building the temple of the Lord, Zerubbabel, and how that parallels Jesus. Zechariah talks about Joshua, the high priest, building the temple of the Lord as Jesus. And we'll see how the builder of the latter glorious temple is both king and high priest in one office. The council of both offices will be held in one man, and this branch will build the temple of the Lord. And so again, this is very much prophesied in Jeremiah 22 and 23. So we had the last king of Judah was Zedekiah. His nephew ruled before him. His nephew was Jehoiachin, or Coniah is another name for him. And so that was Zedekiah's nephew. And God said, write down Coniah's name as childless, meaning he will not have a descendant that takes over this throne of Judah. So God is saying this kingly line, the kingly line that we knew, king sitting on the physical throne in Jerusalem, it's done. It's done. It's over. So again, it was his uncle who ruled as a puppet king after that. It wasn't a descendant. It was the uncle. It was a third son of Josiah. And so chapter 23 of Jeremiah says, so if I've cut off that kind of king, if I've cut off that evil king who sat on the physical throne in Jerusalem, but I made a promise way back when to David that somebody was going to sit on his throne eternally. Well, he says, so I'm going to have to raise up a new branch of the family. And so then again, in Zechariah chapter, 6, Zechariah chapter 6 talks about the branch is Joshua the high priest wearing a crown, sitting on a throne. A priest doesn't sit on a throne. Well, the branch does. And both offices come into one and going to build the temple. And again, like the signet, like the seal, Ephesians chapter 1, when we believe the gospel, we are sealed with the Holy Spirit of promise. We are recreated in the image of Christ. We are baptized into the likeness of his death and raised in the likeness of his new life. We have the seal, the mark, the signet of God through Jesus on us as Christians. How wonderful is that? It's just amazing to think about. And again, going back to the idea when he says, not by my might, not by my power, but my spirit will build this temple. There was a vision that Zechariah has of this lampstand. And remember, what are the lampstands in Revelation? The 7 churches. So we've got this lampstand, right? And he says, on either side of the lampstand are 2 olive trees. And the olive trees are connected to this lampstand. And so they're constantly putting oil into the lampstand, these 2 olive trees, so that it can constantly burn its light. Again, Christ, the church is the fullness of Christ who fills all in all. The idea of filling us with his spirit. And so the question is asked, well, what are those 2 olive trees? He says, well, those are the 2 anointed ones, the high priest and the king, filling the lampstand with glory, filling the lampstand with oil so that the lampstand can bear the light, can burn the light. Again, having that seal of Christ in the church. How amazing is that? Again, the book of Haggai pulls so many things from Israel's past to the present day Haggai's living in, to looking ahead to Christ. I would say even looking ahead to the resurrection, there are even connections we could make to that, but we just don't have time to today. And the idea of bearing the seal of Christ, again, we will bear, 1 Corinthians 15 says, we've borne the image of the earthly, we will also bear the image of the heavenly. Again, he's put his seal on us. Again, what a wonderful book. Do you have more to add to this fourth prophecy or anything that we've talked about today?
I would add what a blessing it is that he has made us to be a kingdom, that we are all, this lesson you've just presented, this is about every single person that has heard this lesson today. You are invited to participate in this church where Jesus said, I will build my church and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. In this chapter, when, you know, all the different kingdoms are going to be destroyed. There is only one kingdom that cannot and will not ever be destroyed. And God says to every soul listening to you today, and every soul that's never heard your voice, he is saying that you can be a part of this kingdom. You can enter the kingdom of God. And so that is his church. That's a relationship with him, a spiritual temple that can never be destroyed. It makes me be at more peace of what's going to happen to the United States of America. I don't know. You don't know. Is that the forefront thing of our mind? Like, hey, if you're a student of history, you're not feeling too good about, you got some shaky ground that's kind of familiar in history. Okay. You can be a part of a kingdom that cannot be shaken. You are secure in the Lord. And if you've got that, you have got it all. You've got what counts. So that's my response. That's what I have. Ira, are you back there listening to us?
Yes, I am. I am glad to be with you. Oh, what a blessing this lesson has been. Thank you both so much. Thank you, Teresa, for bringing this information. And Cindy, your comments have been really great to add to what Teresa has said for us this evening. And as we said to our viewers, in a couple of weeks, we will present the second part of this lesson. Teresa, what can you tell us about the second part for this lesson on Haggai?
Well, we're going to talk about three main things about applying this to us today. We're going to talk about the idea of considering our ways. What are we doing with our life as far as our service to the Lord? Secondly, trusting in the power of the Lord, that Cindy kind of touched on it in her comments. And then how do we encourage? How do we follow God's model of encouragement? How do we stir people up to love and good deeds, as we're told to in Hebrews chapter 10?
Oh, that sounds great. So viewers, be sure to tune in 2 weeks for this lesson, the next lesson that we'll have on Haggai. And next week, we're going to be talking about recognizing Mr. Right with Allison Graham. Cindy and I will be. So be sure to join us then. And every Thursday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern for older women likewise. Throughout the week, though, be sure to join Answering Religious Error on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern. They're talking about keeping my head on straight, and they're bringing us wonderful lessons for Christians on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. They're answering religious questions on Wednesdays at noon. So be sure to send in your questions to them, and they will be glad to address those questions. So again, Teresa, thank you so much this evening for this lesson, and we look forward to part 2.
God bless.
Good night.
Good night.